Good evening, everybody. I am on Grand Island, New York tonight, and I am standing right in front of the Western New York Welcome Center, right here, right off the highway. In fact, I live just a little ways back behind me over here, and this is just an incredibly beautiful building. One of the reasons why this building behind me is well known is because of the sign that you can see right there. It says, "I love New York." And anybody who's been around New York at all has seen those signs different places. That's one of the bigger ones that I've seen around here. I think the first time I saw it was when I was a little boy, when I would see it on TV. But if you make a visit to the other end of the state, to New York City, you'll see "I Love New York" t-shirts and all that kind of thing. And one thing I found very interesting 2 years ago when I moved to New York was there's a lot of New Yorkers that do not love New York. It really is kind of comical, to be honest with you. And I got up here with a lot of excitement, because the mighty Niagara Falls is just right over there, and the beautiful Niagara River is just right over here, and there's just so much amazing beauty. Canada is just right there, and just amazing. It's just beautiful up here. But I got here and found that there's a lot of people that are just not really that crazy about it, and in fact, even some of my out-of-town friends have made fun of me for living in New York. They say, "How can you live up there with the politics in New York?" And my response is always this: that you know what, the socialism in New York doesn't scare me because I lived in Maryland for 22 years. Okay, New York has nothing on Maryland. Trust me on that. Okay, I know what American brand of socialism looks like. It's Maryland, it's New York. There's a lot of places that it's, but you know what, here's what I just made up my mind on a long time ago. I got the joy of Jesus in my heart, okay? And I don't care if you put me in a concentration camp. I've got the joy of Jesus in my heart, okay? You can lock me up in a dungeon in Cuba somewhere, and Jesus doesn't change. I'm not happy because I live in a state that I like all the politics in, which I don't really know if that state exists or not. But anyway, but here's something else that I noticed, and this is getting to the point of this evening's sermon. And that is this: when I lived in Maryland, there were people that hated Maryland. I grew up in Kentucky. There were people that hated Kentucky. I have lived in the city. There are people who hate the city. I've lived in the country. There are people who hate the country. And no matter where you are, there are people that hate it. And what I'm saying to you tonight is, I love New York. I do. I really do. As crazy as that might sound to some people, I love New York. When I lived in Maryland, I love Maryland. You don't have to always be angry at somebody. You don't always have to be bitter at somebody. So the sermon tonight is bloom where you're planted. Bloom where you're planted. You may not like everything that's around you. You may not approve of everything that's around you, but you can bloom where you are planted. 1 Corinthians chapter 7. I want to read two verses for you out of 1 Corinthians 7. Verse 21, it says, "Art thou called to be a servant?" Okay, that basically just means you're an employee. You don't own your own business. You work under somebody else. "Art thou called to be a servant? Care not for it." You mean you don't like your job? It says, "But if thou mayest be free, use it rather." Use it rather. In other words, if you don't like your job, okay, maybe you can find another job. But if you can find another job, or if you can't find another job, use it. Use it. Bring some good out of that. A few verses later, that was verse 21. Verse 24 says, "Brethren, let every man wherein he is called, therein abide with God." So wherever God has you right now, you have to abide with God wherever it is that you are. So let me give you just a few really quick thoughts about this, about blooming where you're planted. The first one is there is no perfect job or relationship. There is no perfect job or relationship. I have known people that will hop from job to job to job to get 10 cents more an hour. Okay, I have known people who have jumped from relationship to relationship to relationship because they found a man, they found a woman, and shock of all shocks, they found some flaws in that person, and so you cash them in and go find another one. There is not a perfect one. There's just not. You can spend your entire life searching and then get to be a very, very old man or very, very old woman and look back and realize that wife number 7 would have been a pretty good idea to stick with her, or husband number 6 would have been don't be that person. First of all, make some better choices up front, okay? But when you make those better choices, then learn how to stick with some of those things. But there is not a perfect job or a perfect relationship. The second thing that I want to give you, and boy, this one is good, and all our Calvary folks who are watching this tonight know I just preached a sermon on this. But number 2 is whining doesn't help. I just preached a sermon on that called "Thou Shalt Not Whine," and I got a lot of really good response out of that sermon. I appreciate all the kind comments, and because everybody was guilty that Sunday. Okay, Philippians 2:14 says, "Do all things without murmuring and disputing." All things without murmuring and disputing. In other words, everything you do it without whining, do it without fussing, do it without fighting, do it without complaining. Of all of the things that God could have come down hard on Israel over in the wilderness, of all the things that they did, which we don't even know the vast majority of the things they did wrong in the wilderness, but of all the things they did wrong in the wilderness that God came down hard on them over, the one that we know the most about was their murmuring, their complaining. And we are to do all things without whining. Whining does not help. In fact, it just flat makes things worse. Quite a few times over the course of my ministry, I have thrown out a challenge to my church, and that challenge is to go 24 hours without saying one negative thing. And I would encourage you with that today. Can you go 24 hours without whining? Can you go 24 hours without complaining about anything? So, number 1, there's no perfect job relationship. Number 2, whining does not help. Number 3, doing God's will is the ultimate goal. Doing God's will is the ultimate goal. Verse 24, I read a minute ago, says, "Brethren, let every man wherein he is called, therein abide with God." So if God has put you somewhere, doing the will of God is the ultimate goal. Now, you might say, "But Pastor King, I am in just a horrible situation." Well, I think it was B.R. Lakin, the famous preacher from years ago, that said, "Clean up the room you're in and then look for the next." Okay, because the next room you go into, there's going to be a mess there too. Clean up the room that you are in. Clean up the room that you're in. Doing God's will is ultimately the goal. All right, now this may be just a mind-blowing concept to some people, but let me just put it out there for you. Could it be that God put you in a messy situation on purpose? Could it be? Could it be that God saw a disaster, saw a dumpster fire, saw a job site that was just a mess? Could it be that God put you in the middle of that on purpose so that you can make a difference? And then finally, number 4 is clean up the dirt. And clean up the dirt rather than swapping dirt. Clean up the dirt. You say, well, how can you make dirt clean? Oh, you can make dirt very orderly. I've seen dirt that is just really dirty and messy looking. I've seen dirt that's very tidy looking, and you can tidy up the dirt that you're in. I think about Job. All right, I think you're probably familiar with the story of Job and all of the calamities that happened to Job. 4 major calamities hit him, and if those things were not bad enough, his wife came to him and said, "Curse God and die." And if that wasn't bad enough, Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar came along and just really gave him a hard time. So, Job, the Bible says, Job chapter 1, verse 22, "In all this, Job sinned not, nor charged God foolishly." You know what charging God foolishly means? That means accusing God. That means whining to God. Okay? In all of that, Job sinned not. Job didn't complain. He didn't gripe. There were times he had some questions, okay? And there were some times that you could say his questions may have pushed the boundaries a little bit. But you know what? He didn't sin. He didn't... Why can we not be that way? Do you realize that when you get to the last chapter of the book of Job that God gave him double everything he had at the beginning? You realize that? Can I tell you why? Because Job found himself planted in a dirty spot, but he bloomed where he was planted. Those 3 friends, the Bible says that Job's captivity turned when he prayed for his friends. Not when he beat up his friends, not when he slandered his friends on Facebook, but when he prayed for his friends. Listen, where are you planted today? Decide that you're going to bloom there.